David pulled up to the fancy restaurant in his black Tesla, checking his watch one more time. He was already 10 minutes late for what could be the biggest business meeting of his career. 3 potential investors were waiting inside, ready to hear his pitch for expanding his tech company overseas. At 42, David had built his business from absolutely nothing and tonight could secure the $50 million he needed to take it global. The valet took his keys with the kind of respectful smile that only appeared when expensive cars were involved. David straightened his custom-made suit jacket and walked through the gleaming glass doors of Chicago's most exclusive steakhouse. The place screamed money, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of hushed atmosphere where million-dollar deals happened over perfectly cooked steaks. But as David stepped into the main dining room, his mind wasn't on business. It never fully was. Even after all these years of success, part of him was still that scared 8-year-old boy who lost everything that mattered most to him. His little sister had been ripped away from him 15 years ago, and despite all, his money and resources, he'd never been able to find her. The hostess, a polished woman in her 30s, greeted him with the practiced warmth of someone who dealt with wealthy customers all day. "Good evening, sir. Right this way to your table." She led him through the restaurant, weaving between tables filled with well-dressed diners, discussing their important lives over expensive wine. David spotted his investors at a corner table, 3 men in their 50s, the kind who'd made their fortunes in oil and real estate back when the world was different. They stood up with firm handshakes and the kind of smiles that meant business. David apologized for being late, blamed traffic, and settled into his chair, his mind already shifting into pitch mode. "Gentlemen, thank you for meeting me tonight," David began, pulling out his tablet. "I think you're going to be very interested in what I have to show you about the Asian market potential." As if on cue, their server appeared beside the table. David glanced up, ready to quickly order a drink so he could get straight to business, but the words died in his throat. The young woman standing there was maybe 30 or 31, with kind eyes and the sort of tired smile that came from working long hours. She was black, medium height, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional, polite, the kind of server who knew how to be invisible while making sure everything ran smoothly. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in a voice that was warm but careful. "My name is Zoe, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" David stared at her face, something stirring in his memory, but it wasn't until she reached up to adjust the small spotlight above their table that his world tilted sideways. As she stretched up, her black sleeve slid down her arm, revealing her left wrist. There, pale against her dark skin, was a crescent-shaped scar about an inch long. David's heart stopped beating for a full second. He knew that scar. He'd been staring at it in nightmares for 15 years. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He was 8 years old again, standing in their tiny apartment kitchen, trying to make dinner because Mom was passed out on the couch again. His 5-year-old sister had climbed on a chair to help him, reaching for the handle of the hot pan, the sizzle of skin against metal, her scream. The way she'd cried while he held her tiny wrist under cold water, both of them terrified and alone. "Sir?" The server, Zoe, was looking at him with concern. "Are you all right?" David realized he'd been staring at her for way too long. The investors were looking at him strangely. He forced himself to speak. "Sorry, could I have a whiskey? Whatever you recommend." "Of course. And for you, gentlemen?" As she took the other orders, David studied her face desperately. The little girl he remembered had the same shaped eyes, the same small dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. But 15 years changed people. He'd changed too. Better nutrition, dental work, the kind of grooming that money could buy. Would she even recognize him? The investors launched into small talk about golf and their latest vacations, but David barely heard them. He watched Zoe move between tables, noticed how she handled a difficult customer at table 6 with infinite patience. how she helped a new server figure out the computer system, how she counted her tips carefully before tucking them into her apron pocket. "David? David, are you with us?" He snapped back to attention. One of the investors was staring at him expectantly. "I'm sorry, gentlemen. Long day." David forced himself to focus, pulling up his presentation. "Let me show you why now is the perfect time to expand into Southeast Asia." For the next 2 hours, David gave the pitch of his life while his heart hammered against his ribs. He showed profit projections, market analysis, growth charts. He answered every question, handled every objection, watched the investors' faces shift from skeptical to interested to genuinely excited. But every time Zoe came to their table, to refill water, deliver appetizers, check if they needed anything, David's concentration shattered. He found himself watching her hands as she set down plates, looking for that scar, trying to match this professional woman with the scared little girl who used to crawl into his bed during thunderstorms. During the main course, one of the investors asked about David's background. "Self-made man, I hear. That's admirable in this day and age." "Foster care," David said simply. It was his standard answer. Short, true, and usually ended that line of questioning quickly. Rich people didn't like to think too much about where kids like him came from. But tonight, saying those words felt different. Because somewhere in this restaurant, if he was right, was the person who'd shared that experience with him. The only person who really knew where he'd come from. When Zoe brought the dessert menu, David almost asked her right then. The words were right there. "Do you remember a boy named David? Do you remember living on MacArthur Boulevard?" But with 3 investors hanging on his every word, it wasn't the time. The meeting wrapped up successfully. The investors were ready to move forward, wanted to meet with their lawyers next week, talked about changing David's life forever. He shook hands, exchanged business cards, made all the right noises about how excited he was for the partnership. But as they gathered their things to leave, David made a decision. "Gentlemen, I need to make a quick phone call. Why don't you head out? I'll be in touch tomorrow." They left in a cloud of expensive cologne and satisfied chatter. David sat back down at the empty table, his hands shaking slightly as he pretended to check his phone. The restaurant was winding down for the night. Most of the tables were empty, chairs stacked on top of them while the cleaning crew worked. Zoe was at the server station, counting out her tips and rolling silverware for tomorrow's shift. David ordered another whiskey he didn't want and watched her work. She moved efficiently, the way people did when they'd held the same job for a long time. When she finished her side work, she grabbed her jacket from behind the counter, a worn denim jacket that had seen better days. As she walked past his table heading for the exit, David made his choice. "Excuse me," he called softly. Zoe stopped and turned, professional smile back in place despite her obvious exhaustion. "Yes, sir? Did you need something else?" David's mouth went dry. This was it. Either he was right and he was about to change. Both their lives forever, or he was wrong, and he was about to sound like a complete crazy person to a tired server who just wanted to go home. "This might sound strange," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But did you ever live in Oakland, near MacArthur Boulevard?" The change in her face was immediate. The professional mask slipped, replaced by something wary and guarded. Her hand moved instinctively to her wrist, covering the scar. "Maybe," she said carefully. "Why would you ask me that?" David's throat felt like sandpaper. "Because I had a little sister once. Her name was Maya. She had a scar on her wrist from a cooking accident. I was trying to take care of us both, but I wasn't very good at it. She was 5 years old when they took her away from me." The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they could cross. Zoe's eyes filled with tears, and her hand pressed harder against her wrist. "What was your name?" she whispered. "David," he said. But back then, everyone called. "Me, Danny." And then she was crying, really crying, right there in the empty restaurant. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Danny? Is it really you?" The tears streaming down Zoe's face told David everything he needed to know, but she quickly wiped them away and looked around the nearly empty restaurant. Her years of survival had taught her to be careful, even in moments like this. I can't do this here," she whispered, glancing toward the kitchen where her manager was still working. "I could get fired for personal conversations during work hours." David's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. After 15 years of searching, of hiring private investigators, of checking social media profiles and foster care records, his little sister was standing 3 feet away from him. But she was scared, and he could see why. Life had taught her not to trust easily. "Of course," he said quickly. "I understand. When do you get off work? Can we talk somewhere else?" Zoe hesitated, her hand still covering the scar on her wrist. I work a double tomorrow. Day shift at the call center, then back here at 6. But I have about an hour free at 4:30 if you want to meet at the coffee shop on 5th Street. "Yes," David said immediately. "Absolutely, I'll be there." She nodded slowly, still looking like she couldn't quite believe this was happening. "If this is some kind of joke—" "It's not," David said firmly. "I promise you it's not. I've been looking for you for 15 years. After she left, David sat, alone in the empty restaurant for another 20 minutes, staring at his untouched whiskey. The waiter kept glancing at him nervously, probably wondering why the guy in the expensive suit was just sitting there looking like he'd seen a ghost. Finally, David paid his bill and walked out to his car, but instead of driving home to his penthouse apartment, he found himself driving through the old neighborhood where they'd lived as kids. Most of it had been torn down for new development, but he still remembered which corner had the grocery store where he used to steal food when Mom forgot to buy groceries, which alley he used to hide in when the landlord came looking for rent. Money. He parked outside what used to be their apartment building and called his assistant. "Cancel everything tomorrow afternoon," he told her. "Something important came up." "But sir, you have the Peterson meeting at 3 and the quarterly review." "Cancel it all," David repeated. "This is more important than any business meeting." That night, David didn't sleep. He paced around his massive apartment, looking at all the expensive art and custom furniture, thinking about how different his life was now. He'd worked so hard to put distance between himself and that scared 8-year-old boy, but tonight it all felt meaningless without his sister there to share it. He spent hours online trying to piece together what might have happened to her after they were separated. The foster care system was a maze of privacy laws and bureaucracy, but his money had opened some doors over the years. What he'd found wasn't encouraging. Maya had bounced between several homes, aged out at 18 with no support system, and then seemed to disappear entirely. At 3 in the morning, he finally fell asleep on his couch, still wearing his suit from the business dinner that now felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. The next day crawled by. David tried to focus on work but kept checking his phone every few minutes. At 4:15, he was already sitting in the coffee shop on 5th Street, having arrived 30 minutes early. He'd chosen a corner table where they could talk privately, and ordered 2 coffees, even though he didn't know how she liked hers anymore. When Zoe walked in at exactly 4:30, David's breath caught. In daylight, without her work uniform, she looked even more like their mother, the same high cheekbones, the same way of holding her shoulders when she was nervous. But there was a strength in her face that their mother had never had. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, carrying a backpack that looked like it had been through a lot of miles. She spotted him immediately and walked over, moving carefully like someone who'd learned not to trust good things. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "Hi," David replied, pushing the coffee toward her. "I got you a regular. Coffee. I didn't know—" "That's fine. Thank you." She wrapped her hands around the cup, but didn't drink. "So, Danny, except you're not Danny anymore, are you? You're David now, And you're, she gestured at his expensive watch, his tailored shirt. You're obviously doing really well. There was something in her voice. Not quite resentment, but not happiness either. David realized she'd probably looked him up online, seen the articles about his company, the photos from charity galas and business conferences. Yeah, I got lucky, he said. Good foster family, scholarship to college, built a tech company, but Maya... He stopped, remembering. You're Zoe now. Is that what you prefer? She nodded. I changed it legally when I turned 18. Too many bad memories attached to the old name. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them trying to figure out how to bridge 15 years of separation. David wanted to ask her a million questions, but he could see she was still deciding whether to trust him. You said you've been looking for me, Zoe finally said. Why? The question hit him harder than he expected. Because you're my sister. Because I never stopped thinking about you. Because I promised I'd find you someday, even though I was just a kid when I made that promise. I used to wait for you to come get me, she said quietly. In my first foster home, I'd sit by the window every day after school, thinking you'd show up. I was so sure you were coming. David's chest tightened. I tried. I begged them to tell me where you were, but I was just a kid. The system doesn't listen to kids. I know that now, Zoe said, but I was 5. I didn't understand why my big brother just disappeared. I'm sorry, David whispered. I'm so sorry. Zoe studied his face, and he could see her making some internal calculation. What happened to you after they split us up? David told her about the Hendersons, the middle-aged couple who'd taken him in. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. Mr. Henderson was a mechanic. Mrs. Henderson worked at the library. They had rules, expectations, but also support. They helped him with homework, made sure he ate regular meals, and when his computer teacher noticed he had a talent for programming, they found ways to nurture it. They adopted you? Zoe asked. They wanted to, but I aged out first. I was already 18 when the paperwork would have gone through. But we stayed in touch. They came to my college graduation. Mrs. Henderson still sends me Christmas cards. Zoe's expression was unreadable. That's nice, that you got a happy ending. What about you? David asked gently. What happened to you? The story that came out was harder to listen to. The first family had seemed nice initially, but they were more interested in the monthly check than actually caring for a traumatized 5-year-old. When Zoe started having nightmares and behavioral problems, they gave up and sent her back into the system. The second home was worse. The father drank too much and had a temper. Zoe learned to hide, to make herself small and invisible. She stayed there until she was 12 and finally got the courage to tell a teacher about the bruises. The third family was better, but they already had 4 kids of their own, and Zoe was more like a live-in babysitter than a daughter. She learned to cook, clean, and manage a household, but never felt like she belonged. I aged out at 18 with 2 garbage bags of stuff and about $300, she said. No family, no references, no idea how the world worked. I've been figuring it out ever since. Where are you living now? David asked. I rent a room in a house with 3 other people. It's not fancy, but it's safe and clean. I work at a call center during the day, customer service for a credit card company. The restaurant job pays better per hour, but it's only part-time. Between both jobs, I make enough to get by. David wanted to ask more, but he could see Zoe checking the time on her phone. I have to get ready for my shift soon, she said. This is a lot to process. I know, David said. I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. Honestly, I'm scared, she admitted. I've spent my whole adult life learning not to depend on anyone, and then you show up out of nowhere, and you're successful and wealthy, and part of me wants to be happy about that. But another part of me is terrified that you'll disappoint me again. The words stung, but David knew they were fair. I understand. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I want to be in your life, if you'll let me. As your brother, not as someone trying to fix your problems. Zoe was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. Can I think about it? This is all happening so fast. 3 days passed before Zoe called. David had been checking his phone every 10 minutes, fighting the urge to drive to her workplace just to see if she was okay. When her name finally appeared on his screen, his hands actually shook as he answered. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "Can we meet again? Same coffee shop? I get off early today." "Yes, absolutely. What time? 3 o'clock?" David was there by 2:30, sitting at the same corner table, watching the door like his life depended on it. When Zoe walked in, she looked different somehow, still cautious, but more determined. She'd made some kind of decision. "I've been thinking," she said as she sat down, getting straight to the point. "And I have questions, a lot of them." "Ask me anything," David said immediately. "Okay." She pulled out a small notebook from her backpack. "I wrote them down because I didn't want to forget. First question, how did you find me? I mean, really, find me. You said you've been looking for 15 years. David took a deep breath. "I hired private investigators. Multiple ones over the years. They kept hitting dead ends because you changed your name, moved around a lot. The trail always went cold around when you turned 18. Last week was pure luck. Or fate. I don't know what to call it. How much money did you spend looking?" "For me?" The question caught him off guard. "Does that matter?" "It matters to me. I need to know if this is real or if you're just trying to ease some guilty conscience." David was quiet for a moment. "Probably around $200,000. Over the years, maybe more. I stopped counting." Zoe's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected a number that high. That's more money than I've made in my entire adult life." "It was worth every penny to find you," David said softly. "See, that's what I'm struggling with," Zoe said, flipping a page in her notebook. "You've been living this incredible life. I looked you up, saw the articles about your company, your penthouse apartment, the charity galas, and I've been... Well, you saw where I work. How do we even begin to bridge that gap?" It was a fair question, and David had been dreading it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I know our lives went in completely different directions. I know I got lucky with the family that took me in, and you didn't. I know that's not fair." "Tell me about them. The Hendersons. What made them different?" David thought back to those early days. They had structure, but it was kind structure, rules that made sense, like I had to do my homework before I could. Play video games, but they helped me with it if I was struggling. They made dinner every night at 6, and we all sat at the table together. No TV, just talking about our day. They had other foster kids? No, just me. They'd been trying to have children for years before they decided to foster. I think that made a difference. They weren't overwhelmed. They could focus on helping me adjust. Zoe nodded, making a note. "What about school? I dropped out when I was 16 because I needed to work to help pay for my foster family's expenses. Did you finish high school?" "I did. The Hendersons wouldn't let me work during the school year. They said my job was to be a student. And when my computer programming teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, noticed I was good at coding, he started staying after school to teach me advanced stuff. The Hendersons drove me to programming camps in the summer, helped me apply for scholarships." "Programming camps," Zoe repeated quietly. "I was working at a fast food place that summer trying to save money for when I aged out." The weight of their different experiences hung between them. David could see the unfairness of it hitting her, and it made his chest tight with guilt he'd carried for years. "I think about that a lot," he said. "How different our lives could have been if we'd stayed together, or if you'd been placed with a family like the Hendersons." "Do you, though?" Zoe asked. And there was an edge to her voice now. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everything worked out pretty well for you. Big business, fancy car, probably never have to worry about money again." Do you really think about what my life has been like? The question hit harder than a physical blow. Every single day, David said firmly. You want to know what I think about? I think about that 5-year-old girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I think about how you used to save half your dinner for me because you thought I wasn't getting enough food. I think about how I promised you I'd take care of you and then I failed. Zoe's expression softened slightly. You didn't fail. You were 8 years old. But I felt like I failed. And every success I've had since then has felt incomplete because you weren't there to share it. David leaned forward. You want to know the real reason I never got married? Never had kids of my own? Because I couldn't build a family when I'd lost the only family member who really mattered to me. They sat in silence for a moment. Zoe closed her notebook and wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Tell me about your life, David said gently. Really tell me, not just the basic facts, but what it's been like, what you've been through. Zoe was quiet for a long time, and David could see her deciding how much to trust him with. Finally, she started talking. The worst part wasn't even the bad foster homes, she said. It was the uncertainty. Never knowing how long I'd be somewhere. Never feeling like I could get attached to anything or anyone. I learned to pack my stuff in a way that I could grab it and be ready to leave in 10 minutes. Do you still do that? Yeah. Even now in my room at the house I rent. Everything important fits in one bag, just in case. David's heart broke a little. More. Just in case what? Just in case something goes wrong. Someone decides they don't want me around anymore. Landlord sells the house. Roommate decides they don't like me. I've learned that nothing is permanent, especially for people like me. People like you. People without family, without backup plans, without safety nets. She looked directly at him. People who don't have big brothers with tech companies who can hire private investigators. There was pain in her voice, but also strength. David was beginning to understand that his sister had survived by becoming completely self-reliant. What do you want? He asked. I mean, what do you want for your future? If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything? Zoe laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. That's a question I stopped asking myself a long time ago. I focus on getting through each month, making rent, not getting fired. Dreams are luxuries. I can't afford. But if you could dream, just for a minute. She was quiet for so long, David thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, very quietly, I always thought about being a social worker, helping kids like we were. But that would mean going back to school, and I can barely afford to live as it is. College isn't exactly in the budget when you're making $12 an hour. What if I helped with that? No. The answer was immediate and firm. I can't take your money. Why not? Because then I'd owe you something. And I've spent my whole adult life making sure I don't owe anybody anything. It's the only way I've survived. David could see he'd hit a wall. What if it wasn't charity? What if it was just family helping family? We haven't been family for 15 years, Zoe said bluntly. We're strangers who happen to share DNA and some childhood memories. I don't know you anymore, and you don't know me. The words stung because they were partially true, but David pressed on. Then let's get to know each other. Let's be family again. It's not that simple. Why not? Zoe gathered her things, clearly getting ready to leave. Because I've spent 15 years learning how to survive without needing anyone, and you've spent 15 years building this successful life that I had no part in. We're different people now. Maybe too different. I don't believe that. David said as she stood up. Maybe you should, Zoe replied. Maybe it would be easier for both of us. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I'm glad you're successful, David. I really am. And I'm glad you turned out okay despite everything. But I'm not sure there's room in your world for someone like me. Or room in my world for someone like you. Zoe, wait. But she was already Gone, leaving David sitting alone with two half-empty coffee cups and the sinking feeling that he was losing her all over again. This time, though, he wasn't going to give up so easily. He'd found her once. He could find a way to reach her again. Because despite what she said, despite the hurt and the walls she'd built around herself, he'd seen something in her eyes. The same thing he felt in his own heart. They were still family. They just had to figure out how to be family again. David didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying Zoe's words over and over. Maybe it would be easier for both of us. But easier wasn't what he wanted. He'd spent 15 years with a hole in his life where his sister should have been, and now that he'd found her, he wasn't about to let fear or pride tear them apart again. The next morning, instead of going to his office, David drove to the call center where Zoe worked. He didn't go inside. He knew that would embarrass her and probably get her in trouble. Instead, he sat in his car across the street and waited. He needed to see her, to make sure she was okay, even if she didn't want to talk to him. At 5:30, employees started streaming out of the building. David spotted Zoe immediately, walking quickly toward the bus stop with her head down. She looked tired, defeated, and David's heart ached watching her wait for public transportation while he sat in a car that cost more than most people made in 2 years. He followed the bus at a distance, feeling like a stalker but unable to stop himself. When Zoe got off at her stop, David parked and watched her walk into a rundown house in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The yard was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and David could see why she'd said her living situation was just safe and clean rather than anything better. That evening, David called his therapist. Dr. Martinez had been helping him work through his childhood trauma for years, and David needed perspective on how to handle this situation without making it worse. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how, Dr. Martinez explained during their emergency phone session. For someone who's experienced abandonment and instability, independence becomes survival. Accepting help feels dangerous because it means depending on someone who might leave. But I'm not going to leave, David said. She's my sister. You left before, from her perspective. Not by choice, but you still disappeared from her life. She's been abandoned by the system, by foster families, probably by other people she trusted. In her mind, it's safer to push you away before you disappoint her. So what do I do? You prove you're not going anywhere, not by forcing your way into her life, but by being consistently present. Show her through actions, not words, that you're reliable. And be patient. This could take time. David started small. The next day, he had flowers delivered to the restaurant where Zoe worked. Not expensive roses that would make her uncomfortable, but a simple bouquet of sunflowers with a note that said, "Thinking of you. Your brother David." He signed it, with his childhood nickname, Danny, hoping she'd remember the little boy who used to pick dandelions for her in the park. A week passed without any response. David sent another small gift, a gift card to the grocery store near her house with a note saying, "Everyone deserves good food." Still no response, but he didn't give up. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later when David got a text message at 2 in the morning. "Why won't you just give up?" it said. David sat up in bed and typed back immediately. "Because you're my sister, and I love you, and I'm not going anywhere this time." His phone rang 5 minutes later. "I got fired today," Zoe said without preamble. When he answered, "From which job?" "The call center. Some customer complained that I was rude, but I wasn't. I was just tired and I didn't fake smile hard enough, I guess." Her voice sounded hollow. "I can't make rent next month without that income." David's first instinct was to offer money, but he remembered Dr. Martinez's advice. "What can I do to help?" "I don't know. Nothing, maybe. I needed to tell someone, and you're the only person who keeps trying to be in my life. Can I come over? Just to sit with you?" There was a long pause. "Okay, but don't expect much. This place is a dump." David drove through the dark streets to Zoe's neighborhood, his expensive car looking completely out of place among the beat-up vehicles lining the street. He found the house and knocked gently on the door. Zoe answered wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her eyes red from crying. She looked younger somehow, more like the little girl he remembered. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi." She led him inside. The house was exactly what David had expected. Old furniture, thin walls, the kind of place where people lived because they had to, not because they wanted to. But Zoe's room was different. It was small but clean, organized, with books stacked neatly on a makeshift shelf and a few houseplants on the windowsill. "It's not much," she said defensively. "It's yours," David replied. "That makes it important." They sat on her bed because there was only one chair, and for a while they didn't say anything. Finally, Zoe spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about helping with school." She looked at him. What would that actually look like? Hypothetically. David chose his words carefully. "However you'd want it to look. I could help with tuition, books, living expenses while you study. You could pay me back later if that would make you more comfortable or not. The details don't matter to me." "But they matter to me," Zoe said. "I can't just be your charity case." "What if it wasn't charity? What if it was an investment in someone I believe in? You don't even know if I'm smart enough for college." "Are you kidding me?" David stared at her. "You survived everything life threw at you and still came out caring about other people. You worked 2 jobs and managed to save money. You figured out how to navigate the world completely on your own. That's not just smart. That's brilliant." Zoe was quiet for a long moment. "I used to be good at school," she admitted, "before everything went crazy. I liked reading, writing stories. My 3rd-grade teacher said I was gifted." What happened to that girl? She learned that nobody cared if she was gifted. She learned that survival was more important than dreams. David felt anger rising in his chest, not at Zoe, but at every adult who had failed her, every system that had let her down. "What if I told you that girl is still in there? And what if I told you it's not too late for her dreams?" "I'd say you sound like a greeting card," Zoe replied, but there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. They talked until the sun came up. Zoe told him about the kids she used to babysit in her 3rd foster home, how she'd helped them with homework and made up stories to distract them when their parents were fighting. She talked about seeing kids at the restaurant sometimes, looking scared or hungry and wishing she could help them. "That's why you want to be a social worker," David said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, stupid, right? Someone like me wanting to help fix the system that broke me. Not stupid at all. Who better to fix it than someone who understands it?" As the morning light filtered through her window, they worked out a plan. Zoe would start with community college classes part-time while keeping her restaurant job. David would cover tuition and books, structured as a loan with no interest and no required repayment date. If she decided she didn't want to continue, or if she wanted to pay him back, those would be her choices. "There's one condition," David said. Zoe's face immediately became guarded. "What?" "We have dinner together once a week. Just dinner, just us. I want to get to know my sister again." "That's it?" "That's it. No strings attached to the school money, but I want a relationship with you. A real one." Zoe considered this. "Wednesday nights, after my shift at the restaurant. Deal." 3 months later, Zoe was enrolled in her first college classes in over a decade. She was nervous but excited, carrying herself differently already. David had helped her find a better apartment closer to campus. Not fancy, but safe and quiet, with good light for studying. Their Wednesday dinners had become the highlight of David's week. They went to small, comfortable places where they could talk without feeling like they were being watched. Slowly, Zoe was opening up, sharing memories from their childhood that David had thought were lost forever. She remembered things he'd forgotten, Like how he used to sing her to sleep when Mom wasn't home, or how he'd taught her to tie her shoes using a story about a rabbit running around a tree. "You were a good big brother," she told him one night over pizza. "I know you don't think you were, but you were. You did the best you could." "I should have found you sooner," David replied. "Maybe. Or maybe we both needed to grow up first. Maybe. We needed to become who we are now before we could be family again." David looked at his sister. Really looked at her. She was stronger now, more confident. The scared, defensive woman from the restaurant was still there, but she was balanced by this new person who was beginning to believe in herself again. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just for going back to school, but for everything. For surviving, for staying kind despite everything that happened to you, for giving us another chance." "I'm proud of you, too," Zoe replied. "For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." 2 years later, David sat in a crowded auditorium watching Zoe walk across the stage to receive her associate degree in social work. She'd made Dean's List both semesters, had already been accepted to the state university for her bachelor's degree, and had a summer internship lined up at a nonprofit that worked with foster kids. As she crossed the stage, Zoe looked out into the audience and found David's face. She smiled. Not the careful professional smile he'd first seen at the restaurant, but a real smile, bright and proud and free.